Hello, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Danielle Jackson, and I am the CISO for SecureAuth and Core Security. Today, we'll be discussing GDPR, preparing for GDPR, and how we can use authentication to support compliance requirements with GDPR. Like many of you on the call today, especially those in the GRC space, legal, security, and other organizations, or for those that just may be interested in the exciting world of regulatory compliance, GDPR is top of mind, and it should be. It's the most stringent regulation blending data security and privacy that we've seen to date. It is spread globally, it is real, and it's rapidly approaching. Just a few quick notes before we get started. I am not a lawyer, and you should consult with your counsel or approved third party on the effectiveness of implementing any solutions getting you GDPR compliant. All right, now that we've got the disclaimers out of the way, let's dig into the exciting world of compliance. Yes, I just said exciting and compliance together twice. Well, that's either going to scare you or prepare you for what's ahead. My goal today is to provide you with an overview of what the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is, why it matters, and what should matter to organizations globally, how to help you prepare your organization for GDPR, and how identity and access management, especially within authentication, can help tackle some of your GDPR requirements and help you comply. Okay, let's get started. As I mentioned, GDPR is rapidly approaching. And if the date hasn't already been ingrained or giving you nightmares, May 25th, 2018 is when organizations in scope must be GDPR compliant. It may seem far for some or may be too close for others, but the reality is many organizations are not ready. You are not alone if you're still getting started. Gartner reports that as much as 50% of organizations impacted by GDPR are not fully ready to be in compliance. In the next 20-ish minutes, I'll provide you with some recommendations on where to start and how we can help. Before we get started on these recommendations, I'd like to take a brief step back. I'm going to share some thoughts on a few key areas of GDPR. First is that GDPR introduces and requires organizations to take stronger protections around data and privacy. One way to do this is by performing assessments. The regulation identifies data privacy impact assessments, or DPIAs, as a new measure to mitigate risk of sensitive data. This is a rather new provision, but it has significant steps that can help organizations towards meeting their compliance requirements. So if you're new to the world of audits and impact assessments, you may want to consider reaching out to another one of your internal organizations, your audit team, security team, or an independent third-party auditor that can help you develop a process or an assessment. The second thing to note, and it's perhaps the most important, or at least something that I've paid most attention to, is the definition of personal data. This is defined as any information relating to an identified or identifiable natural person, a data subject. An identifiable person is one who can be identified directly or indirectly, in particular by reference to an identifier such as name, identification number, location data, think of IP address, online identifier. Now, I think I've said data at least 10 times thus far. Not only should this remind you of what the D in GDPR is, but it should also make you mindful of the importance of the word data and this connection of data to an individual. After all, this is what the regulation is protecting. Those two areas may seem simple, but if you're like me and you've read through all 11 chapters and 99 articles of GDPR, you'll have a few that stick out to you as well. Now, if you haven't read the regulation and you haven't had the opportunity to go through all 11 chapters and 99 articles of GDPR, don't worry, there's still time. You have until May 25th, 2018 to read and fully comply. I must admit, I was a little overwhelmed and not thrilled to read this regulation when it first came out. And when I was searching for resources to help me get started, unfortunately at that time, there weren't many. So I thought it would be helpful to break down the chapters and highlight a few key areas that may help you along your GDPR journey. The first three, a rough start to the regulation, but I found some fun facts in Article 4. Definitions, obviously the definition of personal data being the biggest one, is going to stand out the most in Article 4. Articles 15 through 17 focus on individuals' rights, specifically how a data subject, another fun term defined in Article 4 definitions, has the right to access their data, the right to rectify their data, and their right to be forgotten. For those interested in case study law, the right to be forgotten has strong European roots and has caught the attention and been challenged by many global tech companies, Google included. See, I told you compliance was exciting. So now that we're through the first 3 chapters, I took some time to focus on a big one, and this is Chapter 4. The most applicable chapter, mainly for those in IT, legal, security, and other supporting operational roles, is Chapter 4. There are 6 articles within this chapter that highlight the responsibilities of those that control the systems where personal data lives, how it's processed, accessed, and secured. This is also where the requirements for notification clauses, think data breach requirements, and the data privacy impact assessments, the DPIAs that I mentioned earlier, where they reside. I recommend reading Chapter 4 after you've had a tall cup of coffee, or in my case, 3, because the majority of the internal requirements and processes that I've created for my team were driven and derived from Chapter 4. Wrapping up the last of the regulations are Chapters 6 through 11. While it's also full of fun facts and information, they're not as heavily weighted in my areas of responsibility. So I paid most attention to Article 84, and this is where the penalties reside. It's always nice having figures ready for those that are controlling the budget. So when I ask for funding in support of GDPR compliance, I can give an accurate comparison of costs for a product versus cost of a breach and regulatory fine associated that would impact us. This usually grabs the attention of my CFO and my CEO. After I read the regulation, I was still overwhelmed, and I wasn't really sure where to start. I'm a planner, and I wanted to start organizing and putting things into buckets. I started this next step, and I came across a great resource. Thank you, Gartner. Gartner has organized and suggested 5 key areas to get you ready to take action. While you may want to create buckets or areas on your own, I found these to be a great place to start. Gartner recommends that you start with determining your role. I expanded this recommendation and leveraged how GDPR applies to business in and outside of the European Union. This is an essential step, as not only does GDPR apply to the EU, but it also applies to all organizations outside of the EU processing personal data for the offering of goods and services to the EU or monitoring the behavior of a data subject within the EU. Monitoring is another term that you may want to pay close attention to, especially those with location services or apps with location services. Gartner suggests that these organizations appoint a representative to act as a point of contact to the DPA, the Data Protection Authority, and its data subjects. This is kind of the middle person between the two. I suggest working with legal on who that person should be, who you want that representative from your organization to be. And as I've learned, sometimes your GC may punt this back to your CISO. I have a pretty good collection of hats to choose from now. The good news is, if you do have somebody that is reluctant to be appointed to act as a point of contact to your DPA, you may be able to entice them with a fancy title like Data Protection Officer. While many organizations are already moving in that direction, some will be required to get there sooner. It's great to have fun with these terms and getting to understand the requirements. However, the regulation may require you to appoint a DPO, the Data Protection Officer, so it's best to choose someone that embraces this position. As Gartner notes, this is especially important when the organization is a public body, is processing operations requiring regular and systematic monitoring, or has large-scale processing activities. It's evident that this regulation is driving organizations to be accountable and pay attention to the data privacy rights of individuals. The third suggested area recommended or presented by Gartner to help get you started on GDPR is accountability. I lump my third-party vendors and external dependencies into this bucket. There are 3 important notes Gartner names in this category, and these are: 1, organizations must demonstrate an accountable ground posture and transparency in all decisions regarding personal data processing activities. This immediately made me think of privacy and collection notices and statements. 2, outside parties must also comply with relevant requirements that can impact supply, change management, and procurement process. If you haven't done so already, this is a great way to start formalizing or revising your third-party vendor security assessments or requirements. And 3, it's important to note accountability under GDPR requires proper data subject consent, acquisition, and registration. Many of you on the call are outside of the EU or have third-party vendors you use that are outside of the EU. This next area focuses on Gartner. This area of focus that Gartner recommends next may be of great interest to you. As noted on this slide, which is slide 9 for those that may have nodded off, Data transfers of any of the 28 EU member states are still allowed, as well as to Norway, Liechtenstein, and Iceland. My apologies for those that speak German if I messed that up. Transfers to any of the other 11 countries outside of the European Commission are deemed to have adequate levels of protection are also still possible. This doesn't exclude those within these areas from GDPR. It just makes those operating outside of these areas subjected to additional requirements. There's a different set of requirements for those that are in the EU and those that are outside of the EU, and those that are taking data outside of the EU. Definitions and requirements on the access, transmission, and security of data, especially for those in the U.S., may be slightly different from what U.S.-based organizations are used to. So it's best to check to see if you're up to date. Now, last but not least, Gartner recommends focusing on data subject rights. For those keeping track of how many times I've said data and challenged whether or not data is important, I believe I've said it 32 times, and Gartner has simply stated that data subjects have extended rights under GDPR. They've left an entire article referenced. As noted before, it's Article 17, which is the right to be forgotten. These data subject rights, extended under the GDPR, is definitely something that we want to pay close attention to, especially in the event of a data breach with personal information. So, what happens if you ignore this regulation? Well, I'm glad you asked. The GDPR introduces administrative fines. The consequence of noncompliance, whether egregious or accidental, are severe. Fines could reach up to 4% of annual global revenue, or a maximum of 20 million euro, whichever is higher, for noncompliance with many of its collection, processing, and administrative obligations, and 2%, or a maximum of 10 million euro, whichever is higher, for security and data breach notification-related obligations, amongst others. This is why I mentioned that I like to use statistical data. These are real numbers, and I present them to my board. It's a lot easier to show the value of a security solution, such as SecureAuth, to protect your organization, customers, and reputation when you put up a scary number like 20 million euro. So now that I've informed you with all sorts of fun facts, provided you with a few buckets to fill and organize yourself with, now comes the fun part, solutions. I'd like to spend the next few minutes on applying SecureAuth to help your organization establishing and maintaining strong GDPR compliance. So how does SecureAuth and GDPR come together? A few slides ago, I broke down the chapters and articles in GDPR, and I'd like to start applying some of those articles that I've referenced to our solutions. This will hopefully give you confidence that our solution will help your organization in achieving GDPR compliance. Well, let's start with Articles 15 and 16. Broken down, they address the ability to access personal data, make corrections, and consent to collect data. This is how SecureAuth can help. We can help by permitting data subjects to view, access, and edit personal data that's collected about them and make any corrections as needed. Having the adaptability to various environments, allowing organizations to choose and enable user groups, your admins, individuals, customers, etc., to manage profiles will also help keep you in line with Articles 15 and 16. SecureAuth can also help by allowing organizations to have the flexibility to choose what type of profile data and personal preference information is collected and how it's distributed out. The next area that we can support is Article 17, and as I've mentioned before, it's an extremely important article. This is the right to forget. It's all around the erasure of data. It's a pain point for many companies and those responsible for the networking and control of GDPR. I have a soft spot for you guys, so pay close attention to this requirement. SecureAuth can help you meet this by providing a unified location or source of data. This is going to be your data store. We have an adaptable solution that is able to scale and support applications and users in a variety of quantities. That's going to be a big one for those controlling the data. Logs can also be used to quickly determine and identify a user to ensure that they've been forgotten as needed. It's really easy to understand where that user has been through the log data that's collected with the SecureAuth solution. In maintaining your compliance, you're going to want to also pay attention to Articles 25 and 32. Data protection by design and security is addressed throughout these articles. As a controller, you must design systems to protect and secure personal data based on risk. I feel that this is where SecureAuth really strives and stands out as an authentication and IAM solution. We started to introduce risk in the DPIAs, which is a great way to validate the audit and the impact. But preventing risk and securing the user is really what we're going to focus on in this area. We are able to provide an easy and secure way to access the data. I find this to be one of the most exciting features we offer in our IDP product. Our risk protection and identification layers are unlike any others. This is the benefit of protecting at the user level first. The attackers keep finding new ways to defeat two-factor authentication. SecureAuth keeps evolving its adaptive access platform to keep ahead of the next threat. We detect anomalies, protect access, and challenge users when risk is there. We do this by layering risk checks. SecureAuth Adaptive Access Control stops the misuse of valid credentials. It helps us provide a balanced security and usability solution to you and your customers. We keep the risk checks in the background so that the user isn't hindered by two-factor activities every time they log in. We understand and realize this could be cumbersome for many organizations, especially those in the medical space. We allow for a truly frictionless experience without sacrificing security. Our team would love to show you how we can put this in action. Let us show your organization how you're able to achieve success in securing your users. Request a demo, explore our website, and learn more about our great products and features at SecureAuth.com. I hope this session has helped you in your GDPR goals, or at least kept you up and interested in GDPR longer than you thought you ever would be. Thank you all so much for your time.